Well, hey there, YouTube. It's Petey Two Finger, and I am going to be doing my deep dive, long, chatty video, which is going to be on magnetic stir plate. So I built two. They both use PC fan as the active ingredient. They both have throttle or speed control, and I came up with something that's an easy, affordable way to make a variable speed magnetic stir plate. And the active ingredient is something that's in season now. Now, I had watched a video of another guy. I've watched a few mag stir plate videos, and I've made some of my own. So if you're already been down this road, just go to the second part and check out my new design. Okay. The video that I watched recently that got my gears turning was a guy had used a smaller fan motor. Now they are taller. A PC fan, the advantage of that is, well, one, they're cheap. We all have them, and they're only about an inch and a quarter thick. So you can squeeze them into a cigar box. That's pretty much how people will do it. Mount it in a cigar box, cut a round hole, get these magnets out of a hard drive. They're called neodymium or rare earth magnets, and they're really powerful. So you use super glue, and you glue one on each end, opposite poles, okay? And then what I did was I kept stacking more. I would get another bad hard drive and pull this magnets out of it and then stack them up. So how it works is I have added a battery pack and a throttle, a PWM, pulse width modulation. And then I was getting water warpage. So I put this plexiglass plate on here to eliminate the warpage. And you can see it work here. Here's this throttle control. And then you can have it go slow or too fast. Sometimes it'll go so fast that this thing will just go flying. And some vessels might have a curved, the bottom is curved, and that lifts the stir bar so high that it loses its magneticity, loses its pull. So in that case, I take these 4 screws that are normally in here out, pull this off, and then that drops this jar. It's a 4-liter wine jug that I use for really big runs. So I can drop that down and then it'll make contact. Now, that was bothering me, and I had saw this other video of this guy. He used a PC fan motor, or a PC. He used like a regular mini cooling fan and kind of a narrow motor because a lot of them are really long. And I like this thinner design. I don't want to have a big vessel of liquid elevated too much because I'm a klutz. And you can see here how this, how it warped it. Do you see that ring there around the hole? It's like it comes out to about here, and it's raised up. So yeah, I drilled 4 holes in this countersunk, made these nice bevels, countersink bevels, and then mounted this on here. And I realized it would be better if I raised that up with some washers to balance out the millimeter that we picked up going north from this beveled edge. And it all works really well, even with the 4-liter vessel, until, that one has arched bottom and then I lose contact. So me having to remove this, it made me mad enough to, I started watching videos again. And like I said, this guy had a fan motor from a little portable personal cooling AC power. That's the whole thing. All these other designs use DC brushless motor, PC fan, which is for speed control. I don't know if it's as flexible. It seems to me that you can get better speed control using a rheostat, maybe even how they have a dimmer switch for light switches. They have one that's for the ceiling fan. No, that's it's a higher amperage rating on the ones for the ceiling fans than it is the ones that dim the lights, the chandelier dimmer. So don't get confused and use that one. Use the one that says it's for, if you're going to try this, if you're going to try to slow down a DC motor, use the one that says it's rated for a ceiling fan. Now, there's this thing called the cheese wheel Leslie, And I already went down this route trying to slow it down. You really need a PWM, and that's what's in here. This little green circuit is called a pulse width modulation. And so the power goes in that and it comes out. And the PWM has this control, okay? So what it is, you could think of your DC power coming into the circuit, and how it comes out, it's pulsing like a square wave, so it's turning it on and off at these frequencies. And that's a better way to control the speed of the motor than just adjusting the voltage or the current. Now, you will see guys using multiple voltage power supplies where they have a little switch. It'll say Kobe. It'll be like 3 volts on the bottom and 12 on the top. And they might even have a switch for the polarity to reverse it, or a switch for, oh, in this setting it's 150 milliamp, this setting it's 300. The thing with those is they don't have a lot. Typically, they're rated at 300 milliamps at the most. And I think you should have more amperage for doing this job. I mean, if you're just doing little applications and your stir plate is pulling it off, fine. Here's the problem with mag stir plates. It's all a balancing act. And it has to do with the torque of your motor, the amount of voltage, the amount of current, the weights, the viscosity of the liquid, the amount of liquid, the magnets inside your stir bar. It's all this stuff at play. Because when you get going at too high of a speed and you don't have strong enough magnets, the stir bar will go flying off and it'll go ding, 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 and ricocheting all around the inside of the thing. So you can't go balls out and go crazy fast unless you have a really strong magnet and a strong magnet in your stir bar. And I didn't think like, oh, you need to order bigger stir bars because the magnets are going to be bigger, you know, and because they're expensive. So all this is a balancing act. I found that this PWM, you know, like when I first built this thing, it only had the power switch. Now I added the PWM, then I added the battery pack and the plexiglass plate because it was warping around the hole where I used the hole saw. And then the last thing I did was put this packing tape down to like laminate it to, you know, a lot of times the vessels I'm working with are wet. So, you know, sometimes they aren't, you know, and sometimes I dry them off. But ultimately, I like this. I really do like having plexiglass. I would recommend if you're building your first one, do that. Just to keep it, you know, especially if you're using wood for the chassis. Now, the PWM thing, this was the first PWM I bought. It cost, this was back when everything on eBay was a lot cheaper. So it was like $1 shipped. And it comes with a pot, a separate control. I found that this thing, it did help me slow it down, but not that much. The fan motor doesn't want to go around slow. It'll start out going pretty fast and then you know, and go faster. But it doesn't go slow unless you're starving at voltage and amperage and the viscosity and the volume in your flask is high. Let's say you're working with 100 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask with water or naphtha, and then you have a 500 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask with maple syrup. Or let's reverse that. 500 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask, which is just a rectangular flask full of water, versus a 100 of molasses, or how about just maple syrup? They're going to maybe spend the same, even though there's a lot more volume and mass going on with the 500 milliliter of water. Well, the viscosity is thicker on the 100 mil. So this, it all comes down to a balancing act, and the more ways you have to adjust things, the better. Like if you can have your magnets situation where you can add magnets later, that's helpful. I saw a guy who had he used like a 3 centimeter high piece of PVC pipe that was cut, or even a PVC cap. He just glued it on to lift his magnets, and I thought that was brilliant. Then I saw the guy with the fan motor, it was like a little electric fan that runs off of AC, not DC. That's important. Like a little personal fan, and he had that in a cigar box, or it was a metal. It was like an old piece, like an old power supply chassis. He had that in there, and then he had a power switch, and then a rheostat, which is a big like coil. Like it gets hot. These are found in old recyclable antique electronic devices that you're going to find at the resale store. They're going to probably be more expensive, and they're not going to be in season. They're going to be rare. So the rheostat idea I don't recommend unless you have access to a rheostat. And they probably sell them, but are they cheap? So I've seen people do this where you take an LM317 and just put the potentiometer on that, and that varies the current, the voltage. And that's a recommendation. Like if you have a cheap PWM that's not doing it for you, okay, here's what you do. Get an LM317 voltage regulator and put the potentiometer on there and wire that in front of your PWM, and then have a 12-volt power supply coming in. So you'll be able to throttle your power supply down to 3 volts or lower, and then that'll give you more room to play with your PWM. And if your PWM is only working, like when I got this, it only worked if you turned it all the way up, and then you could come down maybe a 32nd of a turn and it would cut out. So I looked at that potentiometer, and that was 100K. Okay, so I started lowering the level, like 50K, 25K, 10K. I actually didn't do that many. I did a 10K, and then I did a 5K, and then I did a 1K. Then I tried a 512 ohm, and that was too far the other way. So I put, for my setup, running a the power supply is adjustable voltage output from 3 to 12 volts, but it runs hot. It's like 4 to 5 to 16 is what it actually puts out. And there's a switch on there for 150 milliamps or 300 milliamps. And that plugs in back here. Okay. Or you can run it off the battery pack, the two 18650s, which is really nice, I gotta tell you. So this is one way to do it. If rather than not have one of those power supplies where you got to reach over on the wall and do it, I would say build your own voltage regulator circuit into it. Use the LM317 for that. Now they have these other, they call them PWM, pulse width modulation, where it's pulsing the juice rather than just and that's one way to slow this motor. These PWMs that are labeled DC brushless motor speed control, which is exactly what this is. Now, I'm not sure if the one that I got just wasn't scaled for this motor, or if they all act like this. I'm going to say I don't know. But there's another one that's $3 that has a brake button, it has a reverse direction button, and it has all kinds of different outputs with different frequencies, and that looked interesting. So I got one of those coming, and then I got another one that had a heat sink on it. And I think both of those are going to do a much better job than this cheapest possible PWM circuit that I could find, because I don't think the one that I bought said DC brushless motor speed control. But I don't know. And I don't know that much about this. But here's part 2. This is the second one that I built. I built this yesterday. The one main flaw is the hole is a little bit off. It's not quite lined up. But there is 3 speed indicator LEDs. There is a throttle switch and an output. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you now. If I had to do it all over again, I would do it this way. But I can't say that because I haven't tested it out with a liquid yet. I've just... So it's 3-speed and then off. And if you take a look inside of this thing, there's the controller board that has LEDs on it, which it does light up. And then on the bottom here, you just have slots for wiring. So this was some kind of all-in-one kit carry case chassis, and it's all plastic design. When you turn it on, it goes slow, then it builds up. This is cooking. It's going fast. Second speed and low speed. So at the moment, I don't have a adjustable throttle. I just have the 3 speeds, and I'm going to build another circuit, probably that LM317. I might take one of I have these voltage regulators. It's a DC buck or step down, and I got to see if I can wire in my own pot instead of the trimmer that's on there and see what the ranges are. Because see, that's the thing. I need to find a range that's not going to shut this motor off or make it go too fast or smoke the PCB. So I kind of like, I can use this with one of those power supplies that has the 3 to 12 switches on it. But the problem with that is the only way that this will run with that is when the voltage is high. The voltage has to be higher because it's wanting to see 1.5 to 2 amps on the power supply. So the power supply that I'm running is putting out 5 volts, 2.5 amp. Okay? And the circuit board and the fan came out of what was it called, Donna?
Arctic Air.
Arctic Air, which is this, I'm sure you've seen it, it's an infomercial for a swamp cooler. So it's a little white box with a couple switches on it. You plug in the adapter and you pour cold water in it, and it has a computer fan and it blows air through these filter units that wick up the cold water. So it's a swamp cooler. A swamp cooler is an air conditioner that's based on a fan, a styrofoam cooler, and some ice, where you're blowing air through ice somehow. And you could use that in a last case situation. Like, I made a swamp cooler when I was living in my car. And I had a drain, I had like a tube going down out to I cut the door jamb, there's a seal, I cut the bottom of the seal out on this back door of the Chevy Citation I was living in, and had that run out and leak out. And it did help. I mean, I would go and buy a bag of ice and put it on and be like, this living the life, life of Riley. It's fucking leaking all over. I'm sleeping in a car, it was horrible. Absolutely horrible. And the reason that I slept in my car was because I was playing bass. And my mother, at the time I was 17, my dad had just died, and my mom didn't think that it was what I should be doing was playing bass in a band, and she kicked me out of the house for that. So I lived on the street for a while. That was the worst part of it. I found a Ma Bell is the phone company, an underground fiber optic node that had 6 air conditioning units running in it, and there was one little output that blasted cold air out. And I made a tunnel out of Glad bags, where I cut the bottoms off the Glad bags and used 3.5-inch masking tape, and very neatly made this tube that I would attach one end of it with I had a cardboard, like a baffle, and I could stuff that up there and put a rock on top of it, or to use the masking tape and tape it onto this vent. And it would puff out slowly, and then I would take the other end of it and put it in my car window, and in about 10 minutes my car would be 10 degrees cooler. I could actually sleep, because it was like July and August, and it was a record heat that year. So that's my story with the swamp cooler. I got caught. My brother lit a quarter stick of dynamite off next to it when a bunch of the service writers and salesmen were there gathered together to go play paintball. And he caught me jumping out of the car. When it blew up, I was sleeping and I heard this loud noise, and I put my head up by the vent, and a huge hit of smoke came out and hit me in the face. So I freaked out and I jumped out of the car, and I was just in my, I just had underwear on. And they had a Polaroid and took a picture of me. And then the owner of the company came up and said, "What are you, some kind of fucking parasite?" He was a German guy. He called me a parasite. I'm like, well, technically, with the tube where I'm leaching resources, yes, parasitic behavior at best. And you know what? If I got a guy working for me who's living in his car and he did something like that, I'd fucking give him a raise so he could have a place to stay. I'd be like, this guy's fucking brilliant. I'd be like, dude, you're the head of our fucking research and development. Corner office, what do you want? You need a secretary, blonde or brunette? Bring him in. But the swamp cooler thing, they're $5. They come with the 110 millimeter fan. There's a single PCB. The PCB has some LEDs that will light up. There's 2 switches on the unit. One switch changes the colors of the stupid stock LEDs. The other switch changes the speed of the motor. Now, the LEDs didn't light through this plexiglass enough to do anything. I initially did have a second switch to change the colors. Just because it was, I had to. And then that stopped working. Something on the board failed, or something's not right. I checked everything out and tried rewiring it, and eventually just ripped it out of there. But so I would say don't even bother with that. But the thing with the speed indicator LEDs, these 3 LEDs here, those are mounted on the board and they're SMD. So I removed those and soldered. We braided this wire. There's 3 candy cane stripe wires, and we braided those wires last night. Basically, you chuck them. You take 2 of them, 2 wires about 2 feet long, and you put them next to each other, and you fold over about 1 inch, and then you stick that in chuck your drill. And then my wife holds out the red and the yellow wire, and I'll run the drill on slow and move my finger down. And you can braid wire real nice like that. It braids it tightly, but this board, this PCB here, it had those 3 LEDs on it that would change for the speed settings. And I used a hole cutter to give space for the switches to sit, because I had to have this facing down because I wanted the LEDs facing up. And I just drilled there's 2 fasteners stock, and I just drilled those out to mount it. But I had to cut these holes to have the switches in this, there's a little, it's like a coil on the board that sticks up. So I cut those 2 holes and then ran the wires through the holes as well. And this chassis is a really perfect thing for this job. It was absolutely perfect. Couldn't ask for better. I had to cut out a slot here with a hot knife. So for that, I have an old like a pocket knife with a smaller blade, and I'll use a propane torch and get that blade hot and use that to cut. The technique is called hot knife, and you just want to have a fan blowing because you don't want those plastic fumes getting bugging on you. But yeah, this was a real easy build. I'm waiting for the magnets to arrive from eBay, and then I will glue those magnets on here and be able to try it. I think the only thing would be that I need to regulate the voltage because I think it's too fast. For smaller, like let's say I was using a 250 ml Erlenmeyer flask with water, turning this on. Okay, so when it comes on medium, and then it raises up a minute later. So if you're quick, you can turn it on, and it'll go to low. Or you can turn it on, see, that might be too fast. I don't know. It seems really fast to me, and I like the idea of having the high amperage. So finding a variable way to reduce the voltage, like if you're thinking traditionally and cheaply to do it with an LM317, right off the bat, I think those pass a half of an amp or maybe an amp. This calls for 1.5 to 2. Now, 1 amp I'm sure is fine enough to drive this thing. So you could experiment. Try it with an LM317. I would say you could even put the voltage regulator circuit on the wire coming out of the PCB going to the fan. But I don't know. Again, this is all just blind speculation on my part. I do feel I'm going to want to provide some additional speed controlling because I'm really picky with that. Like these 3 speeds are not going to be enough for me. And I know you can vary it because I played around with a 300 milliamp power supply that goes from 3 to 12 volts. And the thing about that was it wasn't running unless I got it past like 6 volts. Like it wouldn't run at 4.5 volts because it was turning and the board mounted LEDs were flickering and it would stop. It would come on and it would turn and the board mounted LEDs were going, and then it would stop. And I was like, what's wrong? Now the other thing with this, on this PCB, there's 2 ports stock, okay? The second port where there's nothing there, I shorted those pins. There's some kind of a piezo sensor. It's like a foil wafer, and it sits in the reservoir, so when you fill it up with water, this thing knows, and I think it provides a hard short to those 2 pins. So if you build this and you're testing it and you're not getting anything, short those 2 pins on that secondary connector. And this is why you never want to not listen to what PD has to say. Yeah, you could skip everything, but you're going to miss the whole secret of how to get this thing to work. Because if you don't short those pins, it ain't going to work. And that was my deep dive on magnetic strip plates. That's what they're called. Gee, that's a big word. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll probably do another quick video for people with lesser attention spans and just show this idea off, because those things are out there. There are people buying swamp coolers. If you said something bad about it, you'd get people who would go nuts and attack you. And I don't know if those people were working for them or if they were just really deeply mentally disturbed people. Because I built myself a swamp cooler when, like, I really wanted it to work. You know what I mean? I wasn't fucking around when I made mine. I needed to cool myself down because I thought I was going to die. It was so horribly hot and I couldn't sleep. So if it wasn't good enough for me making my own back then, A miniaturized version that you buy off Home Shopping Network is certainly not going to feed the bulldog. And by that I mean there's a lot of Arctic airs out there floating around in resale stores. So buy them and give them to that handyman, home chemist, lemonade enthusiast, laboratory operator that you know and love. I'm going to start hoarding them. I'm just going to start making Max stir plates. I'm going to be walking on them. There's going to be
No, you're not.
a current of air strong enough to levitate me. So many Max stir plates. All right, you guys, take care of yourselves. Don't forget to short those 2 pins. If you're scared about cutting in wires to those micro SMT tiny LED pads, you have to go through apply flux first and resolder them to get a good solder bulb on there. Then clean it with alcohol. Then get some single core, single strand wire. Get some, you got to have micro wire. And when you're done tacking those in, you need to hot glue over all of that. And then you won't have to worry about it. So see, you get tips too. And if that was too much for you, well, I don't know what to say. Go and leave nasty comments in my comment section. Get all mad at me because Full Tone is going out of business. Anyway, I'll be here drinking my Memon, Daddy's Memon. You guys take care of yourselves. Hug your pets. Try to stay cool. Try to stay warm. And peace.